So I told you last time we met that we would be concentrating on the life of the Venerable Bede and looking at his work, most especially the Ecclesiastical History of the English people. And I said then that the reason we would be doing so is that the book itself is one of great scholarship. It helps us, from an historical point of view, understand the important elements of history. It is replete with hagiographies, that is, the lives of saints that Bede not only came to know through, in some cases, firsthand, according to firsthand sources, but came to know on an intimate level simply by praying with them, by living the story that they had laid out. Now, what I want to do is just spend a few minutes examining why Bede did this. Bede died in 735. He was born toward the end of the 7th century, and in some ways we might say that he was a child of the Council of Whitby. What is the Council of Whitby? Well, we're going to learn a good deal more about it, but in a nutshell, the Synod of Whitby, or the Council of Whitby, was called and, we would say today, chaired by Abbess Hilda of Whitby. She was the abbess of a mixed monastery in what is today North Yorkshire on the North Sea coast. And the purpose of the council, or the synod, was to draw together Christians of the Celtic inheritance. That was the large majority of the islands of Britain, and the new Anglo-Saxon Christians. Saxons had been coming to the islands for about 100 years, probably more, before the Abbess Hilda. And we look to the year 597 as a seminal moment in this movement. And this is because it was in that year that St Augustine of Canterbury arrived in Kent, and with the permission of the king, was able to use Canterbury in Kent as the base for his Roman mission to the peoples of the Isles. Now, what happened then is, while his initial missionary efforts were slow, the faith gradually spread among the English, or the Anglo-Saxon people. And over the course of time, various kingdoms, one after another, became converted, and they took on Roman customs. But these Roman customs were at odds with many of the Celtic customs that pre-existed them. And so it was necessary to reconcile these two. Abbess Hilda oversaw this council in 663, so about 70 years after the arrival of St. Augustine in Canterbury. And it was at this synod that the church determined it would turn to Roman customs. It would turn to Roman traditions as a way of shaping the church. Now, this was very difficult. It was difficult for the Britons, for the Irish, who had very much not only accepted Celtic forms, but revered their saints and saw this as a rejection of what had gone before, to the point where the abbot of Iona left the council with grave disappointment and frankly refused to accept its decisions. So Iona, the great monastic island off the west coast of Scotland, became an outlier in terms of British Christianity for some time. But it wasn't Iona alone. Many of the British Celtic, or the British Christian communities did likewise. We don't know exactly what was happening in Wales. We can assume that the Roman ways were translated more easily and perhaps more quickly into what is today Wales, but we can also rest assured that there would have been holdouts. Just think of the rich tradition of saints that this land, that is my adopted country of Wales, where I'm sitting right now, can actually boast. They are saints innumerable. And these were saints who really had very little contact with the Roman world. Not no contact, but very little. Their Christianity had emerged from the Christian East, and this is the primary ingredient that was then used to interpret pre-Christian Celtic traditions and took the form of a very monastic-centered Christianity, as well as other particularities that belonged especially to Celtic Christian observance. That said, once the British Church as a whole chose to go along Roman lines, it meant rolling out Roman chant, which had been in progress prior to the council, which meant adjusting the calendar, which meant any number of things, which meant even retentering. So there would have been a visual difference to the post-Council of Whitby or Synod of Whitby church. Now, did this make a new faith? It did not. And any Orthodox listener or viewer with me right now should know that when we talk about the Roman Church in the 7th and 8th century, we are not talking about the Church of Rome as it would become. We are talking about an Orthodox church. We're talking about a church whose life was consistent with the life we know today as Eastern Orthodox Christians. That said, the character of what was perceived as holiness or as sanctity changed somewhat. We see a difference in the lives of saints who do not have this Celtic inheritance and saints as they sprang up among the Anglo-Saxons. We're going to, once again, explore this in more detail over time, but know that with a change in subscription in terms of the traditions the church would draw on to guide its life, it did entail certain differences that would have been palpable and measurable. The reason I mention all of this by way of background to the Venerable Bede is that Bede was a child of all of this, and his partiality laid with the Romans. That is probably one of the key features of the Ecclesiastical History. Bede did not sit down to write the Ecclesiastical History simply because he was motivated by the need to tell the British Christian story. He was, of course he was, but he also had another purpose. And that other purpose was to highlight the virtue of unity with what he saw as the universal church centered in Rome. And so this partiality on his part comes out as he tells the stories. He is somewhat dismissive of the Celtic saints, those who came before the Synod of Whitby, but most especially those who held out against its resolutions. Perhaps this is understandable, but Bede's intent was a good one. He believed in oneness. He believed in unity. He was somebody who was meticulous in verifying his sources. And he knew, probably quite rightly, that if he could point to precedent when it came to exploring a Christian idea in his biblical exegesis, for example, in the way he read the Bible, then he was going to be on more solid ground than he would have been had he just been picking up an idea that could show no further connection. Bede was being cautious. He was doing something that perhaps we're all urged to do. But it is nonetheless necessary to recognize this so that as we're reading the story he tells, we're not assuming some of the things he assumed, and that is that the Irish Christians at Iona, that the British Christians in Wales were simply rejecting that which was good and holy. They were not. We could get that impression were we to only read the Ecclesiastical History. And yet, even as I say so, it is absolutely fundamental to our understanding of Orthodoxy in the Isles to read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest the Venerable Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English people.